Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. With host and founder, Richard Case, and co-host and retreat leader, Kathy Ricconi. Join us every weekday at this time to discuss news, spend time in the Word, and receive answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is End Times Friday, and boy, do we have a lot to talk about. Is that we are taping this right during and after the initiation of the Iran war by America and Israel. We have our good friend Eric joining us. Rabbi actually can't join us today because he's celebrating Purim with his family, which has an it's just interesting coincidence, by the way, and has some interesting thoughts about it, because Purim is the celebration of the conquering of Haman, who was trying to have all the Jews killed. And it's kind of an interesting time, as that's really what's been tried by Iran, but God said, no, I'm going to protect that. So Eric, welcome. First of all, we know that, are you in Tel Aviv right now?
I'm in Jerusalem at the moment.
Okay, so we know the war is happening right now, and it's happening all over Israel. So first of all, and you showed us, show us your phone of the alert you get, and then what options do you have physically, personally at that moment as things are happening?
So we'll get, hold on, let me see if I can pull it up here quickly. Okay, so can you?
Yep, we can see that. Yep.
Okay, so on our mobile phones, we will get an alert. It'll buzz and it'll make all kinds of noises, and we'll get this alert saying that in the next few minutes, something's going to happen in your neighborhood. There's an aerial object headed towards your neighborhood. And that alert will go out to maybe, like, let's say in Jerusalem, maybe there are 20 neighborhoods constituting the city. So maybe 8 or 9 of them will get this at the same time. And there are times when all the neighborhoods will get it, as well as Tel Aviv, because maybe there are more than one aerial projectile on this way. And because Iran is more than 1,000 kilometers away, I think that's right, they can track the missiles as they're coming from Iran by satellite and can predict when they're going to arrive in Israel and deal with it. Our neighbors in the Gulf don't have quite as much of a luxury as we have in this regard. And I'll talk about the Gulf, hopefully, if I have time, and the issues they're facing, because they're facing slightly different issues than what we're facing.
Right. Yep.
And so then we're all geared for this stuff because we're used to this in our country because we've been attacked so often. So we get that alert, and that gives us about anywhere between 2 to 4 minutes to get ready. So if it's the middle of the night and we're in bed, it gives us a chance to get our shoes on, maybe get a coat on, put on pants if we have to, and the jacket, and get ready. And we don't necessarily go to the bomb shelter until we hear the sirens. And the sirens may never even go off in our neighborhood because in the end, the ballistic missile hit a different neighborhood or heading towards a different neighborhood. So, or maybe they intercepted it and there's no need to. But more often than not, the siren will go off and then we all dash off to the bomb shelter. And then this is my wife's home in Jerusalem. So at the basement, there is a bomb shelter, with reinforced concrete walls. And there's a very heavy metal door and all the windows we can shut with metal, so everything's protected. And we can hear in the background, the explosions of generally the anti-missiles taking out the ballistic missiles or whatever they may be. And we can hear the booms in the background. And generally after about 10 or 12 minutes, we either time it and walk out, or sometimes we'll wait for an alert to receive an alert. And like today example, we were there and my wife's son is here and her daughter and her daughter's husband are staying here because we have a bomb in their apartments in Jerusalem. They don't have a bomb shelter in their buildings. So they have to walk to a public one. So it's more convenient to be here. So they're here. So we all go out, we go to the bomb shelter, and there's a neighbor in our building. They're like a townhouse, I think is the most American way to think about this thing. We live there, 3 other units in our building, and one of the other neighbors comes with his family. And today we were in the bomb shelter singing songs because it's a holiday.
How big is the bomb shelter generally?
Well, this one is probably about 10 by 20 feet, something like that.
So it can be pretty packed, yeah. And
my wife spent this morning, she went to go to hear the Megillah reading, that is the story of Esther. And you were commanded to listen to it twice, once in the evening and then once during the day. So she went this morning to, and all the synagogues you you can't have a minion. So they went to a bomb shelter, a public one, which is, I don't know, 10 times the size, easily, probably 20 times the size of the one I just described. And there was a larger gathering of people that could read the story of Esther.
What's the, right now, what's the percentage of the dome and the systems that you have working to counteract it? So how much is getting through?
So the Iron Dome really is not effective for the kinds of projectiles that are being sent our way, except for there are some drones. I mean, when Iran launches a fleet of drones or a swarm of drones, not all of them make it here, A. B, it takes them, I don't know. I really don't know exactly how long, but I'm guessing an hour to get here. So the IDF has plenty of time to track those drones and plan in advance for them. And often they're taken out by actually helicopters. Helicopters manned with certain, kind of like have very heavy machine guns. I don't know what caliber bullets they're involved, but they're pretty heavy machine guns. And they take out these drones. So most of the missiles that are coming in are being taken out by a set of systems built by Israel. Mostly it's called Arrow. There's an Arrow. I think the Arrow 2 generation is being phased out, and they're phasing in Arrow 3.
Yeah.
And Arrow 4, which is being planned, or maybe it's Arrow 5, it hasn't been deployed yet. It's still in development, and that's hopefully going to be able to take out hypersonic missiles. Hypersonic missiles go in the, actually they don't go into the, a ballistic missile is launched and it goes into the stratosphere before reentry, and so it has like a big arc that comes like I'm trying to see,
Sure,
like this. Whereas a hypersonic missile, which are still being developed in certain countries, China apparently has them. It doesn't go in the stratosphere, it stays low, but it can travel at Mach 3 or 4, and it doesn't get here any faster, but it's a little bit harder to take out because you don't. It's a lower elevation. Hopefully, the new generation will be able to take care of those. We'll see. Yeah. What the United States is using and has sold to the Gulf countries is some system called the THAAD. I forget which U.S. contractor manufactures them. It could be Lockheed. I'm not sure. And those are very effective. They're being very effectively used by the Gulf countries right now to take out the missiles heading their way.
What percent of the missiles are getting through to Israel right now, getting past all that?
I think it's like 1 or 2%. Only two have landed. There are some that are just allowed to go pass through because they land in some open area. And there are only 2 that have really were direct hits into populated areas.
Yeah.
So that's really changed. That lower percentage has changed the cost problem with cheap missiles and very expensive anti-aircraft.
Yes and no. It's still an expensive operation to take these things out. Okay. And now maybe I can segue into the Gulf countries. Like, I think the country that's been suffering the most, even more than Israel, is the United Arab Emirates.
Yeah.
And they've gotten hit hard for a combination of reasons, but Iran has a whole collection of missiles. The one that can reach the furthest is capable of reaching actually Rome and Athens. It can't reach London or Paris yet. Probably in a year, if nothing had been done in this war, within a year, those missiles, they would have missiles that could reach London. And probably within 2 years, they could have probably reached the continental United States, is my guess. But the missiles that they can use to reach the United Arab Emirates can be shorter range. They don't need to be as long range, and they have less time to react to them than we do here in Israel. So they're at a slightly disadvantage. The United States has been, I have to tell you, I heard some of the comments that Secretary of War Hegseth was saying today in his press conference, and he is right. The way the 2 countries and the armies are it's at least as well organized and calibrated, probably better than when during World War II the United Kingdom and the United States were allies fighting the Nazis. This thing must have been planned for months. How they've decided the communications between the 2 air forces, the allocation of the targets, how they're being. You think about it. You have both U.S. and Israeli fighter jets flying over the same airspace. You saw what happened in Kuwait. Kuwait made a mistake, and it took down 3 of the fighter jets. No one died in that accident, but it was a mistake. That mistake is so easy to happen, and it hasn't happened not once. So the way the 2 militaries planned this is just mind-boggling, I think.
Could you speak to that? Over here, there's a debate of our involvement in it at all. That Supposedly they're saying, and we should only get involved if it was an imminent threat against us. And since it wasn't an imminent threat, Israel strong-armed Trump to say, we're going in anyway. If you want to help us, fine. If you don't, we don't care, but you better help us. And there's a thought that it was not a jointly planned effort based on some logic behind it. What do you understand from your perspective of how this developed and how did they actually come together and why is it a worthy war for the United States to participate in that?
Look, I'm an American Israeli and I served in the Navy during the time of Vietnam. And I was lucky not to see combat, but I'm as patriotic an American as anybody. And I would not want to see the United States get involved in an unnecessary war. I'll be extremely upset and disappointed should America find itself having to put boots on the ground in Iran. I can't imagine that happening. And that was, and the idea that we can create a democracy in a country like Iran or like President Bush thought he could create in Iraq is a total fallacy.
Exactly.
Okay. I was very much against the Iraq war, by the way. I mean, amongst my friends, I was a minority. I thought it was a huge mistake for the United States. I thought we didn't have a choice going into Afghanistan. I didn't think, because we had to take out Al Qaeda, and there was no choice. But we did have a choice going into Iraq, and I didn't think that was a war that I thought from the beginning was the wrong war. And by the way, something that your listeners should understand: the Prime Minister of Israel at the time of the Iraq war, I think, what was that, 2003?
Yep.
Was Ariel Sharon. And he flew to Washington with his defense minister, who I forget who was at the time, and told the president, and there were witnesses, that you're fighting the wrong war. This is the wrong war to go fight. The problem is Iran and not Iraq, okay? There's this big fallacy in the United States that Israel encouraged the and this is being propagated by people like Tucker Carlson, who doesn't know anything. This guy's totally ignorant. And he just makes things up on the fly. He's very dangerous. But this is well documented, and there's proof of this, what I'm telling you, that Israel advised President Bush not to fight the Iraq war. If you're going to fight a war, the war is with Iran. They thought Iran was the more dangerous adversary. So that's number one. Number two, okay, so let's come back to your question. Is this a war the United States should or should not be fighting? So the question I think that America needs to ask is, do we care whether Iran has nuclear weapons and ICBMs capable of delivering them anywhere in the world? And there are people, I've heard the argument just a couple of days ago from some senators or congressmen, well, North Korea has that. North Korea has nuclear weapons and ICBMs. And that's true. And that's very unfortunate because that happened on President Clinton's watch, and he let that happen. And it really ties everybody's hands on so we have this crazy guy, it was really crazy, running the country in North Korea, and we just have to hope and pray that one day he doesn't push the wrong button, okay? But in the case of Iran, we have a country being led by a death cult, a religiously fanatical death cult that looks and seeks to create martyrs. This is what they do. For them, death is an honor. It's something to be, they worship death. So to put a nuclear weapon with the range of hitting anywhere in the world in the hands of a death cult is suicidal. And I don't see how the United States could allow it, when it has the opportunity to stop it, can allow it, okay? And that's speaking as an American, not an Israeli, okay? All right? Then I think there's the whole issue of China. And this may be a much larger conversation than we have to talk about today. But when you tie all the pieces together, what the President Trump is doing, people, President Trump can be very erratic, and he can say things that I kind of cringe when I hear. But when you look at what he's putting together and all the moves he's made on the chessboard, he's not a transactional guy. He's thinking these things through, or at least got people on his staff that are thinking all this stuff really well through. When you put together what happened in Venezuela, together with what happened in Panama, and what's happening now, it's very clear. This is all a part of this whole issue with China that ultimately is going to be a big issue when China decides to make a move in Taiwan. The United States is going to have a lot of hard decisions. And if it has to deal with a nuclear fanatic religious cult in Iran, I mean, China would love to have Iran with nuclear bombs because it's not going to bomb China. It's going to point the bombs at Europe and the United States. Europeans don't know. They don't care. I don't know what they're doing in Europe right now. So for China to have a loose cannon in Iran pointing its guns at the United States is great because it distracts the United States. I think it's one of the disappointments of President Trump in looking at Europe. Europe should be totally responsible for dealing with the Ukraine. It's on their turf. And the fact that no one has a defense budget of more than like 2% of their, look, Spain's spending less than 1% of their GDP on defense, and they're in NATO. This is President Trump's right. This is ridiculous. And the war is on their turf. They should be the ones totally funding and backing and helping Ukraine in its battle with Russia, because Russia is their problem much more than the United States. But Iran will eventually be the United States' problem if they don't take care of it now. And so this is my answer to those who say Israel prodded the United States. Israel
How universal is what you just said about this view of this decision, about Trump's decision-making strategy? Is that a common point of view, the predominant point of view in Israel?
No, I don't think Israelis think through. I mean, among the defense establishment, amongst the people in the think tanks, and among the analysts who write in the newspapers, yes, this is being talked about a lot. Everyone's watching people were scratching their heads for a while thinking, what's going on in Venezuela? Now everyone can put it together. There were direct flights from Caracas to Tehran every day loaded with members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Why? Because they and Hezbollah were working with Venezuela and the drug cartel, and that's how they were making money. And it was in their interest to harm the United States. I mean, when the Iranians go in the street protesting about killing the great Satan, it's not like a game. This is not some sort of hyperbolic, chant. They really believe, and they really are aiming to bring down the United States, because they know that if you bring down the United States, Europe crumbles, because Europe has no legs to stand on. There's nothing going on in Europe. They want a new world order. In their view, they want an Islamic fundamentalist Sharia law world. That's their view of the world. Now, that runs counter to China. China wants to be the dominant power, but they use each other, along with Russia, to bring down the current world order, because it serves each of their purposes. And then I guess they each think that they'll fight it out in the end later on.
How did on this, you said it's been probably a fairly decent amount of time. How did Israel and the United States come together on planning this out, as opposed to the U.S. being blackmailed or coerced into it? What did transpire? How did it come about that they decided to jointly do this?
How did they keep it so quiet, too?
Well, okay. So when you look at the execution of this war and the operations, it is so fine-tuned. They have every hour plan. I'm just flabbergasted. Nothing like this could have happened had not the planning for this started at least 4 months ago, with daily, daily meetings and these virtual meetings between CENTCOM and the chiefs of staff of the IDF and the air forces of both. This thing could not have happened had planning had not started. So this just didn't happen a week ago, and all of a sudden, Netanyahu calls Trump, says, "I've had it. I'm going to start. And if you're with me, that's great. And if you're not, you can watch." That's not the way this happened. And anyone who thinks that is just ignorant. I'm sorry. They're really either just trying to play politics or they're ignorant. This kind of operation could not have happened the way it's happened without planning starting at least 4 months ago, with intense daily activity. Nothing like this has happened. You can hear Secretary Hegseth today. Nothing like this has ever happened before between two allies. From my view, now it's easy for me to say because I'm a citizen of both countries, and your listeners can certainly be entitled to say he's biased and prejudiced, and I am. I'm guilty. I'm sorry. Okay, but the reality is the United States should be thankful that it has an ally like the Israel. It should have. Imagine at the moment that if Japan were like Israel, or South Korea were like Israel, dealing with China would be 10 times easier than we have today. Or think of any single country in Europe, just one, were like Israel, how they could deal with Russia in Europe. It would be a piece of cake. But the United States doesn't. I don't know. I don't even pretend to understand President Trump's mind, okay? And I'm not sure I want to. But I understand his frustration. I have several very close European. My best friend here was born in Belgium, here in Israel. we're sailors. We sail a lot together all the time, and we're talking all the time. And he's defending Europe. I just simply nailed him the other day. I said, look at it, because he was saying Macron made this big statement. I'm going to come send my jets to go help United Arab Emirates. I said, are you kidding me? That's a joke. Macron is a laughing stock of this world. United Arab Emirates is going to send jets to defend France. United Arab Emirates is doing a great job on their own. They're taking down 98% of what's coming their way. They're doing a fantastic job. And guess what? United Arab Emirates spends 20% of its GDP on defense. Saudi Arabia spends 26% of its GDP on defense. Qatar spends 28% of its GDP on defense. Guess how much France spends on its defense? 2%. Guess how much Belgium spends on its defense? 1%. Guess how much Spain spends on its defense? Less than 1%. And it's not even just the amount of money in your budget. You go interview the people in your country. Are you willing to go fight for your nation? You see it in Israel. Everybody here fight. Not everybody. We have a segment of our population that refuses to serve in the army. We're working on dealing with that right now. But for the most part, everybody serves in this country. So, and people here, and you wouldn't believe how much it infuses patriotism and a sense of belonging in the country. Okay, that doesn't exist in Europe.
What would you say, Eric, is the joint reason, objective? Why did they come together and decide to do this now? What's their purpose in all this?
I think it was a co-joining of mutual interests, and they overlap. First of all, neither country neither country can accept Iran becoming a nuclear power. And given the way the negotiations were going, and certainly the way the deal that Obama structured, by now they would have been nuclear power. And once you're nuclear power, your hands are tied. The United States, or Europe would love to do certain things in Ukraine. They can't. You can't because Russia has the nuclear weapons. I'm sure, I don't know if your listeners may remember, but when President Gorbachev was leading the Soviet Union, there were a lot of nuclear weapons sitting inside the Ukraine.
Yeah.
And a part of the negotiations between Reagan and Gorbachev removed those. I guarantee you that Ukraine's regretting that happened. Because right now, if they had nuclear weapons, Russia could not have invaded them.
Yeah.
Okay. So once you have nuclear weapons, you're immune. You can do whatever you want. And that's what Iran wants. It wanted to be able to do whatever it wants. And that's why, by the way, I don't know if you're listening, based upon everything I've read, it was Saudi Arabia that tipped the scales with President Obama on the decision to go ahead to war. It wasn't Israel. Israel, of course, was saying, we need to do this, but it was Saudi Arabia that said, you have no choice, you have to go do this. Because they understand this part of the world really well. Saudi Arabia does.
Yeah.
That, you don't show, if you threaten force and you don't follow through with force, you're the laughing stock. Obama was the laughing stock. The Iranians were just laughing at the man. Every time he promised force, like he did in Syria, when they used poison gas, he backed away. And in the Middle East, that's deadly. You can't do that.
Yeah.
So coming to answer your question, I think it was a confluence of mutual interests, and the timing just happened. And because the 12-day war in June was so successful and weakened the regime, that this was a timing and opportunity that both countries felt this was the time, this was the right time. And that's why I think they did. And having said all this, I am very skeptical of regime change, okay, and that it's doable. The only, as Denny, who had my Substack knows, the only historical case I know of where a population overthrew a tyrannical dictatorship to establish a democratic republic was the United States of America. You go through the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, the French Revolution of 1789, or the Islamic, Republic Revolution of 1979. They overthrew dictatorships, but they certainly didn't establish anything other than a more brutal dictatorship. Ruthless, ugly, bloody. Stalin killed I don't know how many Russians, Yeah. So the probability that what's going to come out of this war being a new, I think President Trump's exact spot on. This Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah, he's a nice guy. He has good intentions, but the odds of him being able to go into Iran and lead the people and establish anything is pretty low. The history doesn't suggest his success very high. So you can ask the question, or your listener can say, well, why are we fighting this war if it's not regime change and if we don't think we can accomplish it? It's to stop this country from getting a nuclear weapon. And if that means that every 5 years we have to go in and do this again, we'll do it again, until eventually they figure it out.
For Israel, if I could characterize it, is the existential threat to Israel is short-term and real. And to America, it's real, not obviously short-term per se, but it was a joint program to say, let's go do this now together since we were successful before.
No, look, if you had a nuclear, if you have a nuclear Iran with the ability to strike at least Europe, which is certainly the case within a year, and probably eventually the United States. Okay, let's say it couldn't reach the United States, hypothetically. You still have Israel. The United States still has to worry about a nuclear Iran because it's going to threaten all the Gulf states. And until nuclear fusion is ubiquitous and free, this world's still relying on fossil fuels and for the economy to run and for this global order to exist. So it's not just Israel. He talks about the little Satan all the time, but they're proxies and they are attacking these other. You don't think Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates aren't fearful? They're seeing firsthand now. Iran is not just attacking military installations in these countries. They're attacking hotels. They're bombing airports. So that dynamic has changed dramatically. I don't know. There's talk now here in the IDF, in the echelon, that if we start seeing the number of ballistic missiles reaching us really reach a certain low level, which everyone's hopeful will happen next 2 or 3 days, we have another layer of defense called David Sling, which can handle the kinds of missiles that are going to United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. So there's talk that either under the table, because they'll be embarrassed to take them, that somehow Israel will help these countries defend themselves against these missiles. Because that kind of defense doesn't help us against the kinds of missiles we're seeing, but they can help those countries.
Yeah. As we finish this segment, what's this current status of the war? What's Israel's thought about how long this is going to last for them to be not able to have much impact on the other countries?
Well, I'm hearing 2 to 3 weeks. I'm expecting 3 to 4 weeks. Okay, and there's talk that they may start schools again next week in Israel and start encouraging businesses to return to sort of normal because the incidence of ballistic missiles is reaching a very low steady state, and it may get down to zero. We don't know. U.S. and Israel they don't have 100% control of the skies. Iranians still have the ability, in some cases, to take out not the stealth fighters, but other, not the B-2 bombers because they're also stealth, but the B-1 bombers and other kinds of ordnance still. So I think from what I've read, that the United States and Israel expects by 1 to 2 days at most, they will have full command of the skies. And when that happens, they're going to be sending in the heavy bombers. And those heavy bombers are going to start taking out all the buried infrastructure that they can. They're going to be hitting the manufacturing facilities that build the missiles, all the infrastructure that's there. They already I don't know if your readers know that there was a U.S. submarine just sunk a Iranian destroyer off the coast of India. So the Navy, Iran had a Navy a week ago, a full Navy. They don't have a Navy anymore. They have nothing. They just attacked one of their own ships, their own tankers.
By the way, is their strategy and it looks like the technology, they can identify where the missile was shot from, and then they can go and bomb that particular site?
Yes, but here's the problem, especially for Israel and to some extent the United States. Bear in mind, the United States, all the fighter jets are taking off from aircraft carriers. Why? Because the Gulf states wouldn't let them use their bases to attack Iran, because they naively thought that if we stay neutral, then Iran's not going to attack us. Well, I think that they've learned a lesson. So because of either aircraft carrier or long distances like Israel has, the fighter jets go in, they have very clear targets, they drop their ordnance, and they come back. And then they refuel, and then maybe they switch pilots, and they go out again. You can't take out all of the launchers and the missile infrastructure that way. You need to have planes that can stay in the air all the time and be doing reconnaissance and watching what's going on the ground, and if necessary, fire away. And that can happen with drones or B-1 bombers or other kinds of planes. And to do that, you need total control of the skies.
Okay.
And we've almost got it.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for sharing. We're going to come back in our next session, and Eric wrote a great Substack about the implication of all this actually relative to even think of the history of Israel as well as the religious perspective on it. So we're looking forward to having that discussion. So Eric, thank you so much for giving us all this very beautiful, detailed info, and how beautiful it is that we understand it through your eyes and can see it all, and you explain it so well. So thank you so much. So if you have any questions that you'd love to send in, audience, send it in at questions@abideministries.com, and we'd love to answer them. And we'll continue to have Eric, and then when Rabbi comes back, we'll join him as well and get the straight story. So Eric, thank you. Denny, thank you, and we'll see you next session.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.